Okay, so I want to talk about dark movies, and I'm not talking about like tonally dark or like Insidious. I'm talking about like visually dark movies. If you recognize this thing in front of me, it's pretty messed up because I just pulled it off of YouTube, but this is a shot from The Batman. Famously a beautiful movie, but also famously very, 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 very dark. And actually, Vox just did a video about this, and they talked about The Batman, so that's fair. But they were basically saying, since most movies are shot digitally these days, since about 2012, they're getting darker because back in before 2012, everything was shot on film, and so you have movies that Vox was basically arguing that they lit them correctly just to be safe, which is true. So this is The Dark Knight from Christopher Nolan. These are all shots from The Dark Knight, where they shot them safe, but they shot them well. Whereas now they're pushing them way further. And so that's true, but I want to kind of go into it further. And so I want to pull up some scopes and actually look at these images. So this is a waveform monitor, if you've ever seen this. The way I have it set up, 0 is basically total black, so, you know, black, and 100 is white. And Film Select, their little logo is on the right, so that's what all this stuff is on the right. But basically, this shot from The Batman exists basically between 25% and 0, or really like 12.5% 0, which is incredibly dark. And I can prove that by looking at a shot from The Dark Knight, where look at all this information. There's stuff, you know, this fire is all the way up to the top here. The windows are way up in what we would consider bright exposure, but Batman himself is in silhouette. And so what's happening in these shots, these Nolan shots from The Dark Knight, is it was shot on film, and yes, I guess technically Vox was right, they were safe, but they also, Nolan is doing this really interesting trick where because everything around the characters are bright, but they're dark, they're in silhouette, they appear even more darker. It's called contrast or color contrast or exposure contrast. By showing things bright around them, they seem darker. And so a lot of times these shots in The Dark Knight, these people are in silhouette, and so you're just seeing their shapes, but you still have enough information around them to sort of discern what's going on, which is not what's happening in The Batman. The Batman exists completely in the bottom of the graph, and so you're having to like push your nose into the screen to really see the detail in the graph. Obviously there's no detail here because I pulled it off of YouTube, but in theory you should be able to see stuff back there. And so that's what I want to sort of talk about first is, yes, I think Vox is technically right that things that are able to be color graded now can be pushed a lot further, which is true, but that's not the only reason why. I think it's just filmmakers, like Tarantino's all about this, where he insists all of his stuff goes into film, goes into movie theaters, which sure, you know, I consider movie theaters to be a religious experience, especially a movie designed like a blockbuster to be in movie theaters. Yes, sitting in a dark theater watching it with a calibrated monitor, a calibrated projector, it's like no other experience. But unfortunately, we live in a society where that's really not so a common thing anymore. So yes, seeing The Batman the way it was intended in theaters is an incredible experience without question. People have feelings about how the sound mix was, which I'm not a sound person, but I kind of agree. But as far as the darkness goes, this is a very dark image, and it's kind of unnecessarily dark because when they shot it, honestly, it was probably closer to like this. Ignoring the compression artifacts, that's just YouTube, but that's probably how bright it was on the day when Robert Pattinson was standing in front of that guy. It was a pretty bright image, and then the colorist or the director of photography or somebody, probably the colorist, you know, brought the image way down into the darkness, which is what you're seeing now. Obviously, it looks good and it's sharp, but there's just very little detail there because, unlike Christopher Nolan, there's no contrast there. There's no, let's see here. There's, you know, this is another one, a silhouette, and what's giving the silhouette is the bright images are not the characters, they're things around the characters to give you context. And so even if you're doing this on your phone, even if you're on your couch in a brightly lit room watching the TV, you can still see what's going on because things are exposed, whereas these shots, not so much. I mean, it's not exclusively that, like there's different shots that are extremely bright. Look how bright that explosion is. But for the most part, most of these shots are very, very dark, and it's very hard to see stuff, which is, you know, incredibly frustrating. So that's my first complaint. My first complaint is I think filmmakers need to be a little bit more honest about who's watching and how people are watching, and maybe just acknowledge that the older way of doing it, where just to, you know, what Vox would argue is playing it safe, is a better way to do it for everybody. It's just a little bit more accessible. It's a little bit more friendly. Obviously, every movie is going to look way better in movie theaters anyway. I don't think anybody's arguing that, but to make a movie designed to only work in movie theaters or to work in a colorist suite, I'm in a colorist suite. So I have a calibrated monitor that can actually see this correctly. However, I have to turn off my bias lighting because my bias lighting gives me such a glare, I can't see anything either. So I'm sure on YouTube right now with all the compression, you can't see anything. Another thing I want to get to in a minute. So yeah, I think filmmakers need to be a little bit more honest about who's watching it and maybe not be so, exclusionary about why make it so that it sucks when you don't see it in a theater. That just kind of, that sucks. I'm not blaming specific people. I'm just saying the mentality itself is just kind of mean-spirited. The second thing is, compression, video compression. So streaming compression. And I think a good way to demonstrate this, so this is a fairly well exposed scene. The faces are, Christian Bale's face, it's saying maybe 25%. This one behind him looks like about 40%. So the faces are pretty well exposed, and the background, there's context there. He's still doing the same thing where he's doing this color contrast and this exposure contrast to really make the people stand out. But the compression algorithm is such that it has to throw away some kind of data. And so what most video compression for streaming has done is it throws away the darkest parts of the data. And I don't know why, this is just my theory. I don't know however I got onto this, but if you look at this, I just boosted the exposure. Look at all these artifacts. But if you look at their faces are more or less the same. There's not really much of a problem because there's actually literally more information in the bright parts of the image than there are in the dark parts of the image. It's crazy. It's why you're watching a show on streaming and every time it's a night scene or every time it's dark, you have these wild blocky compression artifacts. That's because the compression algorithm has decided none of that information is necessary for what you're doing, which does actually make a lot of sense. Makes sense for news, makes sense for sports, makes sense for, brightly lit movies, honestly. Even safe movies like The Dark Knight, for instance. It's not a big deal. Again, Nolan and his team are brilliant in that they're doing this contrast thing where the bad guys or the characters are always in the darkness and bright things are around them, making them appear even darker than they are, whereas again, the Batman is the opposite. Everything is dark, and so he basically lives inside the dark. I get the psychology of it. I totally get it. I think it's cool. It's a cool idea, but just for practical sake, it's brutal. It's absolutely brutal, and it's hard to look at. And even when you can see it well, it's hard to look at because it makes your eyes strain, or at least makes my eyes strain. So what I would like to happen is, and I think this is especially important for movies that are dark, like The Batman, but also for horror movies, because so much of horror movies, this is not a horror movie, this is just stills from The Dark Knight again, just so we're clear. So much of horror movies, the story is told in the shadows. You want to be able to look into the shadows and see, which is, I consider The Dark Knight, or The Batman, I'm sorry, to be kind of a horror movie because it's all about looking into the shadows. And yes, it is a incredible experience in the movie theaters, being able to look into the shadows and maybe see something. But when you're on the metro in San Francisco on your way to somewhere, watching this on your phone, you're not gonna be able to see any of this, which sucks. So what I would like to have happen is I would like for video compression, especially streaming, instead of having just the one algorithm that saves just the brightest parts of the image and throws away all the rest, because again, this looks absolutely ridiculous. When they actually edited it and color graded it, they made it dark. But anyway, neither here nor there. What I want to have happen is two compression algorithms. I want the regular compression for regular stuff, brightly lit stuff, and then I want a darker compression algorithm that focuses on the darker part of the chart instead of the upper part of the chart, to really focus on the details in inherently darker images, like The Batman or any horror film. There's an entire genre of movies in horror films that are suffering from this absolutely horrible broken compression that you see in darkness, because the algorithms favor a different exposure level. They favor up here, and most horror films don't live up there because the darkness looking into the shadows, that's where the creeps are. So it sucks. My other little complaint about that is just video compression, streaming compression in general. And I want to actually demonstrate this with my own footage now. So YouTube. So I did this. This is a video I put up. It's about talking about how to shoot in low light. So this is a very dark image, other than the lamp, which the lamp is obviously quite bright, but the rest of the image is very, very dark, extremely dark. And actually, I matched it to the Batman just for giggles. But again, extremely dark. But what's happening in the image is, so what I'm seeing, and again, this is going to be 3 layers of not going to work because this is a YouTube video, so YouTube is going to compress it anyway. But what I'm seeing right now in front of me is the actual MP4 H.265 image, so the real image. I believe it's a 1080p image, this image right here. Yeah, look what happens when I upload it to YouTube and then just bring it back. And I even did the thing where you upscale it to 4K and then download it 4K. This is the image after I downloaded the 4K image on top of a 1080p. Are you ready? Can you see it? Can you look at my shirt? Can you look at the detail on the wall in the background? It's an absolute nightmare. It basically, it's, you know, I'm sure somebody's done the math, but to me, it feels like a 4K image is basically the amount of information as a 1080p image. A 4K streaming image is about as much as a 1080p actual image. A 1080p actual image, maybe 720p, you know, streaming download. That's how much information gets thrown away. It's just compression. It is what it is. It's the cost of doing business. I understand that, but that's crazy. So, yeah. So that's where I'm at. I think filmmakers, movie makers need to understand that not everybody's going to go to the theater and watch stuff, and that they don't have to. A movie should reasonably look excellent on everything. Maybe not perfect, but definitely good on everything, even though, yes, without question, in the movie theater it's going to look better. But that doesn't mean it has to only look good in the movie theater. I think that's just a mean-spirited way of thinking. And the other thing is, I think there needs to be two compression algorithms. One favoring regular stuff the way it is, the upper part of the graph where a lot of bright stuff lives, and then in movies that are inherently dark, either by the filmmakers telling the compression algorithm, or, you know, Netflix or whoever's running it, or just the algorithm itself recognizing how dark the image is and switching to a different algorithm that favors the darker parts of the image and throws away the bright parts of the image. Because, again, you know, this is a clip from The Dark Knight. You don't need all this extra information. You just need to see the people being outlined, because that's who you're following. In this image here, even it's a fairly bright image, but again, you don't need all this extra information. You just need their outline. It doesn't hurt that, you know, Nolan and his crew are absolute masters of color and separation, all this kind of stuff. But yeah, horror movies are just having a bad time right now because they're getting the worst of it, because they're always dark, or they tend to be dark, and all the information is in the darkness. And unless you're in the movie theater watching it the way it was intended, you're just not going to see the information that you want to, and it sucks. And it's as simple as, in my opinion, if they haven't already come up with the algorithm, which I'm sure they have, you know, tinfoil hat Matt right here talking, I think they just need to switch it to the other algorithm if they have it. And if they haven't had it, I don't think it's going to be that much more trouble for them to come up with an algorithm that favors the lower part of the image than the upper part of the image. Does that make sense? I don't know. That was a weird rant. I was kind of all over the place, but I think I got out what I wanted to say. Catch you next time.